The Empress of the Vaelthrin Dominion had not spoken in 43 seconds. In a court where silence was currency and patience a weapon, this was a declaration of war. Marcus Cole stood at the center of the obsidian hall, surrounded by 700 alien nobles whose contempt radiated like heat from dying stars. He was the first human to set foot in this chamber in the Dominion's 12,000-year history, and every cell in his body understood why that record had stood so long. "You come before us," the Empress finally said, her voice like frozen silk, representing a species that has possessed interstellar capability for less than 2 centuries. "Your territory spans 11 systems. Your military strength is negligible. Your cultural contributions to the galactic community are—" She paused, allowing the silence to complete her sentence. "Unmeasured." The nobles rippled with quiet amusement. The Vaelthrin were tall, their skin ranging from deep violet to pale lavender, their eyes solid pools of silver that reflected everything and revealed nothing. They moved like water and spoke like poetry, and they had ruled 3,000 star systems for longer than humanity had possessed written language. Marcus kept his hands still at his sides. He'd learned that gesture meant submission to the Vaelthrin, but he suspected any movement he made would be wrong. "You have nothing to offer my empire." The Empress rose from her throne, 7 feet of cold elegance descending 3 steps to stand above him. Her ceremonial robes, woven from materials humanity couldn't name, cascaded around her like captured starlight. "So why are you here, human?" The trade delegation behind him had already failed. Ambassador Chen had spent 6 months negotiating for this audience, only to have the Vaelthrin High Commerce Council reject Earth's proposals within minutes. Mineral rights, denied. Technology exchange, refused. Cultural embassy, laughable. Marcus was the contingency plan, the last resort. A former engineer who'd lost everything in the Kepler 442 mining collapse, his wife, his daughter, his reason to care about his own survival. The diplomatic corps had chosen him precisely because he had nothing left to lose. "I know," Marcus said. His voice didn't waver. "I'm offering it to you." The silence that followed was different. Sharper. "Clarify your meaning." The Empress's silver eyes narrowed. "You're right. Humanity has nothing your empire needs. No resources you can't acquire elsewhere. No technology you haven't already surpassed. No strategic value worth your attention." Marcus met her gaze, a violation of protocol that made several nobles hiss through their teeth. "But I'm not here to negotiate for humanity. I'm here because I heard the Empress of the Vaelthrin Dominion has rejected 47 suitors in the past decade. Because your council is pressuring you to form an alliance marriage with the Keth Ari hegemony to secure the Outer Rim. Because you've run out of excuses." The temperature in the room dropped. Not metaphorically, the Vaelthrin regulated their environment through collective biological processes, and 700 of them had just become very, very cold. "You dare," began one of the high nobles, but the Empress raised a hand. "Continue," she said. Her voice had lost its ceremonial distance. It was curious now. Dangerous. "The Keth Ari prince who's been proposed is Commander Vorakith. I've read his file. He's efficient, politically valuable, and he watched his own sister executed for questioning his father's authority. He'll make an excellent alliance." Marcus paused. "He'll make a terrible partner, and you believe yourself a superior option?" "No. I believe I am an impossible option. A human consort would be so far beneath your station that no one would ever believe it was a political arrangement. No faction could claim you'd chosen sides. No enemy could leverage the alliance against you. I would be so utterly insignificant that I would be invisible." He spread his hands, empty, offering nothing. "That's my value, Empress. I have nothing to give you. No agenda. No family to position. No species powerful enough to matter. Just myself, for whatever that's worth. It's worth nothing." "Yes. You would accept that? A life of being nothing? Of standing beside power you could never touch, never share, never influence?" Marcus thought of Sarah's laugh, of Emma's small hand in his, of the moment the mine shaft collapsed and took everything that had made him human. "I've been nothing for 3 years, Empress, At least here I'd be nothing with a purpose. The Empress studied him. Seconds stretched into eternities. The nobles behind him were rigid with outrage, but none dared speak. This was no longer court theater. This was something else entirely. You will be tested, she said finally. Not by me, by my court. They will attempt to destroy you in every way that doesn't leave marks. They will make your existence unbearable. They will wait for you to break, to flee, to prove that humans are the fragile creatures we believe them to be. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the alien chemistry of her skin, something like winter rain and distant electricity. If you survive one lunar cycle, I will consider your proposal, and if I don't survive, then you'll have confirmed everything we already know about your species. The Empress turned away, ascending her throne. Take him to the consort's wing. See that he has appropriate accommodations. 2 guards flanked Marcus, not touching him, but making their presence felt. As they led him toward the chamber doors, he heard the whispers beginning. Mockery, disgust, anticipation of his failure. But one voice cut through the noise, soft enough that only he could hear. You're either very brave or very broken, the Empress said, not looking at him. I haven't decided which. Marcus didn't turn around. Neither have I. The consort's wing was beautiful in the way that weapons were beautiful, elegant, precise, and designed to serve a specific function. In this case, the function was isolation. Marcus's chambers occupied the far end of the corridor, separated from the main palace by 17 locked doors, and approximately 400 Vaelthrin who would rather see him asphyxiate than offer directions. The rooms themselves were adequate, a sleeping alcove with gravity controls he didn't understand, a hygiene chamber with functions he was afraid to test, and a sitting area that overlooked a garden of crystalline plants that hummed in frequencies just outside human hearing. On his 3rd day, the food stopped coming. Not dramatically, no announcement, no confrontation. The automated delivery system simply ceased to acknowledge his presence. When he tried to access it manually, the interface displayed text in Vaelthrin's script that he couldn't read, but whose tone he understood perfectly. By the 5th day, the hunger was a living thing in his stomach. By the 7th, he'd learned to identify which crystalline plants in the garden were merely inedible versus actively poisonous. By the 9th, he'd found the maintenance shaft that connected to the palace's lower levels, where the service caste worked in efficient silence. The Vaelthrin who discovered him stealing nutrient paste from a supply cabinet was named Thessaly. She was young by their standards, barely 2 centuries old, and her position as a maintenance coordinator meant she ranked somewhere between furniture and inconvenience in the palace hierarchy. She should have reported him. Instead, she watched him eat with an expression that might have been curiosity. You're the human, she said. I'm a human, Marcus replied between mouthfuls. Probably not the only one you'll ever meet, if things go well. They won't. Go well, I mean. Thessaly tilted her head, studying him the way a biologist might study an unusual specimen. The high nobles have placed wagers on how long you'll last. The current favorite is 12 days. What's today? Day 9. Marcus laughed, a sound that seemed to startle her. Then I've got 3 days to disappoint some very wealthy people. Why do you find this amusing? Because the alternative is finding it terrifying, and I've been terrified before. It's exhausting. He set down the empty paste container. Thank you for not turning me in. I haven't decided yet whether I will. Fair enough. Marcus wiped his hands on his already ruined formal jacket. Can I ask you something? About the Empress? Thessaly's silver eyes flickered, a micro-expression Marcus had learned to recognize as discomfort. That depends on the question. Why hasn't she taken a consort? The real reason, not the political explanations. For a long moment, Thessaly was silent. The humming of the maintenance shaft filled the space between them. Finally, she spoke. Empress Aelenith was not born to rule. She was the 4th daughter, meant for a scholarly life, permitted the luxury of emotions and attachments that would have been trained out of an heir. When the succession plague took her sisters, she was already bonded. Bonded, paired, promised. What you might call. Thessaly searched for the word, loved. What happened to them? Her partner was deemed unsuitable for an Empress consort. Insufficient lineage. They were given a choice: sever the bond voluntarily, or have it severed by the council. Thessaly's voice was carefully neutral. The Vaelthrin do not discuss what occurs when a bond is severed involuntarily. It is enough to say that Aelineth's partner chose not to survive it. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not pity. He'd learned that pity was useless, but recognition. The particular weight of carrying grief that the world expected you to set aside. And now she refuses to bond again. She refuses to pretend. The suitors who approach her want the Empress. They want the Dominion's power, or its protection, or its prestige. None of them want her. Thessaly looked at him with something that might have been new respect. You offered her nothing. That may be the first honest proposal she's received in 30 years. Marcus processed this. So when she said she'd consider my proposal if I survive, she was giving you a chance to prove that your nothing was genuine. That you weren't simply a more creative form of the same manipulation she's endured for decades. How do I prove that? Thessaly's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. You've already started. Most suitors would have demanded accommodation. Complained. Leveraged whatever influence they could muster. You broke into a maintenance shaft and ate paste, designed for cleaning equipment. Marcus looked down at the container in his hand. That wasn't food. It was technically non-toxic, wonderful. The sound Thessaly made might have been a laugh, if the Vaelthrin laughed. I'll ensure your food is restored. Quietly, so the nobles believe you're still starving. Let them think they're winning. Why would you help me? Because I was there when her partner died. I was young. Barely more than a child, but I remember the sound she made when they told her. Thessaly's silver eyes were ancient in her young face. I have not heard her make any sound at all in 30 years. When she spoke to you at the audience, when she asked if you were brave or broken, there was something in her voice. Something that sounded almost like hope. She turned to leave, then paused. The nobles will escalate. Starvation was gentle. What comes next will not be. I know. You accept this? Marcus thought of the collapse, the darkness, the weight of stone and silence. He'd survived that, not because he was strong, but because dying had seemed like too much effort. I've accepted worse. The escalation came on day 12. They challenged him to a duel. Not officially, of course. Officially, a duel between a Vaelthrin noble and a human would be so far beneath consideration that the suggestion itself was an insult. But Lord Kethvarin, third cousin to the Empress and vocal supporter of the Keth-Ari alliance, had found a loophole. The challenge of shadows was an ancient tradition, rarely invoked, wherein one party could demand that another prove their worth through a trial of endurance. It wasn't combat, it was worse. 40 hours in the shadow chamber, a space designed to break the mind through sensory manipulation. Darkness that breathed. Sounds that came from inside your own skull. Temperature fluctuations that convinced your body it was dying. The Vaelthrin could enter a meditative state to survive it. Humans could not. You don't have to accept, Ambassador Chen said, his holographic image flickering with the strain of the secure connection. We can extract you. No one would blame. Yes, they would. Marcus watched the sun set over the crystal garden, painting the humming plants in shades of amber and violet. The Vaelthrin would see it as confirmation of everything they believe about us. And the Empress would see it as proof that my offer was empty. Your life is worth more than a political statement. Is it? Is it? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Is it really? Chen had no answer to that. The shadow chamber was everything Thessaly had warned him about and worse. The darkness wasn't just absence of light, it was presence, a weight that pressed against his skin and whispered in voices that sounded almost familiar. He heard Sarah calling his name. He heard Emma crying for him to come back. He heard the grinding of stone and the silence that came after. 12 hours in, he stopped trying to distinguish between hallucination and memory. 20 hours in, he stopped caring. 30 hours in, he started talking. Not to anyone, to himself. To the darkness. To the ghosts that the chamber had conjured from his fractured mind. I couldn't save them, he said. To Sarah, or to the void, or to no one. I was 6 meters away when the shaft collapsed. I could hear them. I could hear them screaming my name, and I couldn't move the stone. I clawed until my fingers bled, and it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The darkness pulsed, listened. I didn't come here to die. That's what everyone thinks, but they're wrong. I came here because I didn't know how to live anymore, and I thought, maybe if I was useful, if I could do something that mattered, I could remember what it felt like to be human. He laughed, broken. Turns out humans feel like this. Like we're always 6 meters away from the people who need us. Always clawing at stone that won't move. 34 hours. 38. 40. When the chamber doors opened, Lord Vaelthrin was waiting with a retinue of nobles, their silver eyes eager for the sight of a shattered human. What they found instead was Marcus Cole, seated cross-legged in the center of the floor, eyes closed, breathing steady. He wasn't unbroken. The chamber had cracked him open and rearranged everything inside. But broken things could still stand, could still move forward, could still choose. Marcus opened his eyes and met Vaelthrin's gaze. I believe, he said, his voice raw but clear, the tradition requires you to acknowledge my completion of the trial. Vaelthrin's face contorted with something too complex for Marcus to read. The human has endured, he announced, the words dragged from him like splinters. The challenge of shadows is satisfied. As the nobles parted to let Marcus pass, he saw her. Empress Aelineth stood at the far end of the corridor, alone, her ceremonial robes replaced with simple gray. She had been watching, waiting. Their eyes met. You heard me, Marcus said. Not a question. The chamber is monitored. Her voice was soft. I heard everything. Then you know I'm not here for the Dominion. I'm not here for humanity. I'm here because I needed somewhere to put all this. He gestured vaguely at himself, at everything, and you seemed like someone who would understand carrying weight that no one else can see. Aelineth stepped closer. Close enough that Marcus could see the faint lines of silver that traced her lavender skin like circuitry, like scars, like stories. When they severed my bond, she said, I spent 40 days in that chamber. Voluntarily. I thought if I could survive the darkness, I could survive the loss. Did it work? No. She reached out, her fingers hovering a breath away from his face. Not touching. Not quite. But I learned that survival and living are not the same thing. I've been surviving for 30 years, Marcus Cole. I'd forgotten that living was an option. Her fingers brushed his cheek. The touch was brief, alien, electric, like static and starlight, and the first breath after drowning. 1 lunar cycle, she said. You have 11 days remaining. Try not to die. I'll do my best. For the first time in 30 years, Empress Aelineth smiled. The Cathari delegation arrived on day 19. Commander Voraketh was exactly what Marcus had expected, tall even by Vaelthrin standards, his violet skin darker than most, his silver eyes sharp with calculated ambition. He moved through the obsidian hall like he already owned it, his entourage of warriors and diplomats spreading through the palace like an infection. The human is still here. Voraketh didn't bother hiding his contempt as he passed Marcus in the corridor. I'd heard the Empress had taken a pet, but I assumed it was metaphor. Commander. Marcus inclined his head in the Vaelthrin gesture of acknowledgement between unequals. Not submission, just recognition of reality. I hope your journey was pleasant. Voraketh stopped. Turned. His eyes narrowed. It speaks with proper forms. He circled Marcus slowly, examining him like one might examine a curious insect. Someone has been teaching you. The maintenance girl, perhaps. Thessaly? She always did have sympathies above her station. Marcus kept his face neutral. I've been studying. The Vaelthrin culture fascinates me. Does it? And what have you learned, little human? That your people value strength above all things. That weakness is not forgiven, only exploited. Marcus met Voraketh's gaze. And that Commander Voraketh of the Cathari hegemony executed his own sister because she suggested their father's territorial expansion was strategically unsound. She was correct, as the subsequent loss of the Meridian worlds demonstrated, but correctness was not the point. The point was that she had dared to question. The temperature in the corridor dropped sharply. You know nothing of Cathari honor. I know that honor which requires the death of family members to maintain isn't honor at all. It's fear dressed in ceremony. Marcus kept his voice mild, conversational. I know that the Empress has refused your proposal for 3 years, not because she lacks political sense, but because she recognizes what you are. And I know that you're here now with a fleet of 12 warships in orbit, because the hegemony has decided to stop asking. Vorakith's hand moved to the ceremonial blade at his hip. I accuse you of nothing. I'm simply observing that a diplomatic delegation doesn't typically require military escort. Unless, of course, the diplomacy is expected to fail. For a long moment, Vorakith was silent. Then, slowly, his hand dropped from his blade. The Empress was right to find you interesting, he said. You see clearly, for a primitive. But seeing and acting are different things. You may understand what's happening, but you are powerless to prevent it. When the Empress accepts my proposal, and she will, because the alternative is war, you will be discarded. Forgotten. A footnote in the history of a species that never mattered. Perhaps. You accept this? I accept that you believe it. I accept that you may even be correct. Marcus stepped aside, allowing Vorakith to pass, but I've learned that accepting the worst possible outcome doesn't mean surrendering to it. It just means you're not surprised when you have to fight. Vorakith laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Fight? You? Against the Cathari hegemony? No. Not against you. Marcus smiled. For her. The commander's expression flickered, confusion, then dismissal, then something that might have been the first faint stirring of concern. You will regret this conversation, Vorakith said. Probably. But I've regretted worse. That night, Aelineth summoned him to her private garden. It was not the crystal garden visible from his chambers, but a smaller space, hidden in the heart of the palace, where bioluminescent flowers bloomed in patterns that shifted with the Empress's mood. When Marcus arrived, the flowers were dim, their light barely visible, a reflection of the weight he could see in her posture. Vorakith has made his position clear, she said, without preamble. Accept his proposal by the end of the lunar cycle, or the hegemony will consider my refusal an act of war. Can the Dominion win that war? Eventually. But the cost would be catastrophic. Millions of lives. Decades of recovery. The outer systems would be devastated. Aelineth turned to face him, and in the dim light, she looked exhausted. Ancient. Ice. I cannot condemn my people to that suffering to preserve my own preferences, so you'll accept. I see no alternative. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescent flowers pulsed softly, uncertain. When the mine collapsed, he said, I spent 3 days trapped in the darkness. No food, no water, barely any air. I could hear the rescue teams working above me, but the stone between us was too thick, too heavy. Every hour, they got a little closer, and every hour, I became more certain they wouldn't make it in time. Aelineth listened. She did not interrupt. On the 3rd day, my oxygen was nearly gone. I'd accepted that I was going to die. I'd made peace with it, or what I thought was peace. And then I heard my daughter's voice through the stone. She was calling for me. She said, Daddy, keep breathing. Just keep breathing. We're almost there. Marcus's voice cracked, just slightly. She was 7 years old. She convinced the rescue team to let her talk through their communication system. She stayed on the line for 6 hours, just talking to me, telling me about her day, about the pictures she'd drawn, about the stars she'd named after us. She saved you. She reminded me why surviving mattered. Not for myself, for her, for Sarah, for the life we'd built together. He looked at Aelineth, his eyes bright in the dimness. 4 months later, I lost them both. And I spent 3 years believing that surviving had been a mistake, that I should have let go when I had the chance. Why didn't you? Because Emma's voice was in my head. Keep breathing, Daddy. Just keep breathing. I couldn't stop hearing it. Marcus stepped closer, into her space, close enough that the bioluminescent flowers began to brighten at the edges. I came here because I thought being useful might give me a reason to keep breathing. But that's not what happened. What happened is that I met someone who's been holding her breath for 30 years, waiting for permission to stop surviving and start living again. Aelineth's eyes were silver mirrors, reflecting his face back at him. You cannot fight the hegemony. No, but I can fight for you. Not with weapons. I'd lose that battle in seconds, but with the only thing I have. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. His hand found hers, the first time he'd touched her intentionally. Her skin was cool, smooth, vibrating with some subtle energy he couldn't name. I can stand beside you and refuse to leave. I can make it clear that whatever choice you make, you won't make it alone. I can be the nothing that stays, even when everything else falls apart. That's not enough. It never is. But it's what I have. The flowers around them were glowing now, brighter than Marcus had ever seen them. Blues and purples and silvers, pulsing in rhythm with something he couldn't hear but could feel, a heartbeat, perhaps. Or two heartbeats, learning to synchronize. My partner, Aelineth said softly, used to say that the strongest bonds were forged in impossibility. That when two beings chose each other despite every reason not to, the choice itself became unbreakable. She turned her hand in his, her fingers interlacing with his. I told myself I would never risk that again. That the cost of losing it was too high. What changed? You survived the shadow chamber. I watched you break, and then I watched you reassemble yourself into something that could still stand. Her free hand rose to his face, tracing the lines that exhaustion and grief had carved there. I realized that I had been so afraid of breaking again that I had forgotten I already knew how to heal. Marcus leaned into her touch. Aelineth, don't. Her voice was gentle but firm. Don't make promises. Don't speak of futures we may not have. Just stay. Here. Now, shall I? Let me remember what it feels like to not be alone. So he stayed. And in the garden of living light, surrounded by flowers that sang in frequencies beyond human hearing, the Empress of the Vaelthrin Dominion allowed herself to be held by a human who had nothing to offer except himself. The assassination attempt came at dawn. Marcus woke to the sound of shattering crystal and the sharp scent of Vaelthrin blood. 3 figures in dark armor were in his chambers, their movements precise and professional. Keth, Ari, assassins. He recognized the pattern of their gear from intelligence briefings he'd been given before departing Earth. The first one reached him before he could rise from the sleeping alcove. The blade descended toward his throat and stopped, caught in a grip of pure telekinetic force. Aelineth stood in the doorway, her hand outstretched, her silver eyes blazing with light that Marcus had never seen before. The assassin struggled against her hold, his armor creaking under pressure that should have been impossible. You dare, she said, and her voice resonated with harmonics that shook the walls, to bring violence into my palace. To threaten one who is under my protection. The second assassin charged her with a plasma blade. Aelineth gestured, and he crumpled, his nervous system overwhelmed by forces Marcus couldn't perceive. The third tried to flee, but the doors sealed themselves before he could reach them. Tell your commander, Aelineth said, advancing on the trapped assassins, that the Empress of the Vaelthrin Dominion does not negotiate under threat. Tell him that the human Marcus Cole is my chosen consort, and any attack upon him is an attack upon me. Tell him that if he wishes war, he will have it, and that the Dominion has not revealed the full extent of its capabilities in 12,000 years. She released her hold on the first assassin, letting him fall to the floor. Now, before I decide that a message delivered by corpses would be equally effective. They went. In the silence that followed, Aelineth turned to Marcus. The terrible light in her eyes faded, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. You're hurt, she said. Marcus looked down. The assassin's blade had grazed his shoulder before Aelineth's intervention. A shallow cut, bleeding freely, but not dangerous. It's nothing. It's not nothing. She crossed to him, her hands moving over the wound with surprising gentleness. You almost died because of me, because I allowed myself to, because I chose, because you chose to live, Marcus finished. That's not something to apologize for. The hegemony will retaliate. Orakith cannot allow this insult to stand. I have just condemned my people to war. You've condemned your people to freedom. Marcus caught her hands, stilling their anxious movement. You showed them that their Empress will not be bullied. That she will protect those she cares about, regardless of the cost. That's not a weakness, Aelineth. That's leadership. You don't understand. The casualties will happen regardless. If you'd accepted Vorakith, he would have consolidated power and used the Dominion as a weapon against everyone who opposed him. The war would have come anyway, just with your people on the wrong side of it. Marcus pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. You made the right choice. Not the easy choice, the right one. That's all anyone can do. Aelineth was still for a long moment. Then slowly, she relaxed into his embrace. I named you my chosen consort, she murmured against his shoulder, in front of witnesses. The declaration is binding. I noticed. You're not upset? I offered myself to you on the first day. I believe this falls under accepting the proposal. Marcus smiled into her hair, soft, silver, smelling of ozone and flowers. Though I'll admit, I expected more paperwork. The sound she made was almost a laugh. There will be paperwork, ceremonies, political negotiations. The council will be furious. Let them be furious. We'll face them together. Together. Aelineth pulled back just enough to look at his face, her silver eyes searching his. You truly mean that? I have nothing to offer your empire, remember? But you I can give everything to. Whatever's left of me. Whatever I can rebuild. It's yours. That, she said softly, is more than enough. The war lasted 4 months. It was brutal, as all wars are, but shorter than anyone had predicted. The Keth-Ari hegemony had underestimated the Dominion's resolve, and more critically, they had underestimated what an Empress fighting for something she loved could accomplish. Aelineth was not a warrior. She had never commanded fleets or led troops into battle, but she understood her people, understood the intricate web of alliances and obligations that held the Dominion together, and she wove them into something stronger than any army. Lord Kethvarin, who had championed the Keth-Ari alliance, found himself isolated when his own family discovered he had sanctioned the assassination attempt. Vaelthrin law was clear on the matter. Violence against a declared consort was violence against the throne. His execution was swift and public, a message to anyone else considering betrayal. Commander Vorakith died in the final battle, his flagship destroyed by a coordinated strike from forces he had dismissed as negligible. The irony was not lost on anyone. He had been so focused on the Dominion's known military assets that he had failed to account for the small, desperate ships of the outer systems, ships whose crews had everything to lose and nothing left to fear. Idle. Ships crewed by humans. Earth had not entered the war officially. The diplomatic complexities were too great, the risks too high. But humanity had a long tradition of volunteers finding their way to conflicts that mattered, and the call had gone out within hours of the assassination attempt. The Empress of the Vaelthrin had taken a human consort, had declared him human consort. Worth protecting, had gone to war rather than surrender him to those who would see humanity remain forever insignificant. 300 human ships joined the fight. Their technology was inferior. Their numbers were laughable. But they were there, standing beside an alien empire that had every reason to dismiss them, because one man had stood up in the Obsidian Hall and offered nothing but himself. Marcus watched the final battle from the palace's war room, surrounded by Vaelthrin strategists and human volunteers who had somehow found their way to him over the preceding months. When Vorakith's flagship broke apart in a bloom of silent fire, the room erupted in cheers. But Marcus was already moving toward the door. He found Aelineth in her private garden, sitting among flowers that blazed with light so bright it almost hurt to look at them. She had been there since the battle began, connected to her fleet through bonds Marcus still didn't fully understand, experiencing every victory and every loss as if they were her own. It's over, he said. I know. Her voice was exhausted, strained, but beneath the weariness was something Marcus had never heard before. Peace, Awaisiandi. The hegemony is requesting terms. Their council has declared Vorakith's war invalid. They're offering territorial concessions and a century of non-aggression. That's good. It's better than good. It's transformative. The balance of power in the quadrant has shifted. The Dominion is stronger than it's been in generations. She looked up at him, silver eyes bright despite her exhaustion. Because of you. Because of us. And 300 ships full of humans who decided that an empire that accepted one of them was an empire worth fighting for. Marcus sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. Humanity has a new ally. A real one, not a trading partner or a political convenience. That matters, Aelineth. That changes everything. You always see the larger picture. I see you. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. 4 months of war, of planning, and fear and desperate hope, and this simple gesture still sent electricity through his veins. I see someone who took a risk on a broken human because she was tired of being alone, and ended up reshaping the galaxy. I didn't reshape anything. She trailed off, searching for words. I remembered how to want something. How to fight for it. You gave me that. You gave yourself that. I just refused to leave. Aelineth laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, the sound of 30 years of grief finally releasing its grip. You are annoyingly persistent. It's a human trait. We're very difficult to get rid of. I've noticed. They sat together as the flowers dimmed to a gentle glow, their light shifting through colors that Marcus had learned to read over the months. Contentment, affection, the quiet joy of adult. Proximity. The council wants a formal bonding ceremony, Aelineth said eventually. They've been drafting protocols for months. The first human Vaelthrin union in history. There will be delegations from every major power in the quadrant. Sounds exhausting. It will be. Weeks of ritual, days of negotiation, endless scrutiny from beings who want us to fail. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. But at the end of it, you'll be mine. Officially. Irrevocably. Recognized by every power in known space. I thought I was already yours. You are. But the galaxy needs to see it. They need to understand that this wasn't a political arrangement or a desperate gamble. It was a choice. Two beings who chose each other despite every reason not to. Marcus remembered her words from months ago, about bonds forged in impossibility, about choices that became unbreakable. When I stood in the obsidian hall, he said slowly, I told you I had nothing to offer your empire. I meant it. I was empty, Aelineth. Hollow. I had lost everything that made me human, and I thought the best I could hope for was to be useful before I faded away entirely. And now I understand what you meant about survival and living being different things. He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her hair. I'm not empty anymore. I'm full of things I never expected to feel again. Hope, purpose, the terrifying, wonderful knowledge that tomorrow matters because you'll be in it. Aelineth pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Her hand rose to his face, tracing the familiar planes with infinite gentleness. When they severed my bond, she said, I thought I would never be whole again. I built walls around what remained of me, became the Empress because I couldn't bear to be Aelineth. I ruled an empire while the woman inside me withered. Her thumb brushed his cheekbone. You didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. I saved myself. But you reminded me that I was worth saving. That there was still someone inside the Empress worth knowing. She's my favorite person in the galaxy. Your species has only met a small fraction of the galaxy. Doesn't matter. I'm confident in my assessment. Aelineth's smile was like sunrise over an alien world, strange and familiar and beautiful beyond words. The ceremony, she said? Not behind, where consorts traditionally wait. Beside. As an equal. As a partner. That's going to upset the traditional factions. Yes. Very much. Her smile widened. I find I no longer care what upsets them. Then yes. 1,000 times, yes. I'll stand beside you for the ceremony, and every day after. I'll argue with your council and irritate your nobles and track maintenance paste on your ceremonial floors. That was one time. It made an impression. On my floor, yes. They laughed together, in the garden of living light, two broken beings who had somehow found in each other the pieces they'd been missing. The war was over. The peace was beginning. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, A small blue planet was learning that its children had found a place among the powers of the galaxy, not through strength or resources or strategic value, but through the simple, stubborn human insistence on showing up, standing firm, and refusing to leave. The bonding ceremony took 3 weeks. Marcus endured it with as much grace as a human could muster, which meant he only mispronounced the ritual phrases 6 times and accidentally insulted the Kethran ambassador just once. In his defense, asking about someone's spawning season was apparently very different from asking about their family. But when it was over, when the last dignitary had departed and the last protocol had been satisfied, Marcus and Aelinith stood alone on the balcony of the Empress's private chambers, watching twin moons rise over the crystal gardens of the Dominion's capital. "Husband," Aelinith said, testing the human word. "Wife," Marcus replied, testing the Vaelthrin bond marker that had been permanently inscribed on his neural patterns during the ceremony. Strange, isn't it? How words can change everything and nothing at the same time. We were already this. The words just let everyone else know. T. She leaned into him, her body warm against his in the cool night air. "My council has begun receiving marriage proposals for you." "What?" "Secondary alliances, political consolidation. Several noble houses believe that a human with the Empress's favor could be leveraged." She laughed at his expression. "Don't worry. I've rejected them all, in rather colorful terms. I'm almost afraid to ask. The Kethran ambassador suggested I was being possessive. I told her that humans were monogamous by nature, and that attempting to circumvent that would be viewed as a declaration of war." She smiled. "I may have exaggerated slightly." "Only slightly? We're adaptable. But I've decided I prefer the simpler arrangement." Marcus turned her to face him, his hands resting on her waist. In the moonlight, her silver eyes were luminous, beautiful beyond anything his species had words for. "You know," he said, "when I came here, I truly believed I had nothing to offer. Not just to the Empire, to anyone. I was convinced that the best version of me had died in that mine with Sarah and Emma. And now I think maybe the best version of me hadn't been born yet. Maybe it took losing everything to understand what I was capable of becoming." He pulled her closer. "I'm not the man who stood in the obsidian hall." He was empty, desperate. "I'm something new, something that couldn't have existed without you. We've made each other into better versions of ourselves." Aelinith's arms wrapped around him, her face buried in the curve of his neck. That's what bonds are supposed to do. Not just joining, but transformation. Becoming something neither could be alone. "I love you." The words were simple. Human.I. Insufficient to capture the depth of what he felt. But they were true, and they were his. And he had earned the right to say them through months of darkness and doubt and choosing. Every single day, to stay. "I love you," Aelinith replied, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated in his newly modified neural patterns, saying the same thing in 1,000 layers that human language couldn't express. "I will love you until the stars go cold, until the Dominion is dust, until the universe forgets that we ever existed. And even then, whatever remains of me will find whatever remains of you." Is that a Vaelthrin bonding vow? It's my bonding vow. The traditional version is much less romantic. I prefer yours. "Good." She pulled back, silver eyes bright with emotion and mischief, "because you're stuck with it now. And with me. Forever, by every standard either of our species uses to measure the word." "Forever," Marcus agreed. "That sounds about right." Above them, the moons continued their ancient dance across the alien sky. Below, the crystal gardens hummed with frequencies that spoke of joy and union and the strange, wonderful possibility that two beings from different stars could find in each other a home. And in diplomatic halls across the quadrant, representatives of 100 species whispered about the human who had walked into the most powerful throne room in known space and offered nothing, and received everything in return. Humanity, they were learning, was very difficult to get rid of. It was, perhaps, their greatest strength. The end